Welcome back. In this video we'll be covering the variables section of this tutorial. Before we go ahead and start, I should mention that most of this stuff is what we call comments, so it's not actual code. There are notes that we can write that will be ignored by the compiler. How we do this is we write in a double backslash, and that's how the compiler knows that everything on the same line that is after the double backslash can be ignored. So all of these are comments, and then here you see we have code. This is all code. This first bit is where we define dependencies for this file, and the code starts here. We have there's a curly brace here. There's also one here. So for each of those, there is a matching closing curly brace at the end of this file, all the way down here. So curly braces define a block of code. So everything that we'll be writing in here will be inside of this inside set of curly braces, which in this case is public static void main. We talked about in the last video. That's where your code starts. All right. And keep in mind that Java is case sensitive, so if you were to type something in capitals when it's expecting something in lowercase, it's not going to compile. You're going to have errors. So same goes for spelling errors. You have to type everything exactly the way it's expected. All right, so we'll get started into this first section, variables. So variables are containers where you can store values. When you create a variable, you need to specify the type and the identifier, and here we can specify the value as well. So this here is the type, int. The type meaning, the type is how the computer knows what kind of value you want to store inside the variable. So int is an integer that holds whole numbers. Then we have the identifier. Identifier is how we're going to refer to this variable later on. So later on, if we want to access whatever value we put inside this variable, this container, that's what we're going to use. So you can name that almost whatever you want. In this case, I named it age. Just make sure you don't start variable names with numbers and that you don't have special characters in them other than underscores are fine. And by convention, this doesn't actually break anything, but it is a standard to start variable names with a lowercase. And if you have multiple words in there, to have each word start with a capital other than the first. All right, and in this case, so we have an integer variable, we're calling it age, and we're setting its value, initially at least, to 20. All right, so whenever I refer to age later on, that'll represent a value of 20. We have a semicolon here at the end. That means that's the end of our instruction. So this is one command in Java. So you need that semicolon, otherwise you'll get errors. All right, so here's another variable, but with a different type. A Boolean is something that can only be either true or false. So for here I called it is human. It's false. It could also be true, but it cannot have any other value. It's just on or off switch. Then we have a string. This type of variable holds text. So it's called a string because it's a string of characters. Something that's pretty important with strings is when you set the value of a string, you need your value to be enclosed with these double quotes. Otherwise, the computer won't be able to understand that that this is supposed to be a string value. All right. So here we have a variable first name. We've assigned Peter as a value, and here Parker as the last name. Here's another another variable. This one's of type double. Doubles hold decimal numbers. So similar to earlier, we had the integer, which could hold whole numbers. With doubles, you can actually use decimals. So that's what doubles are for. Yeah. All right. You can use some math on doubles and integers and other types that we're not covering in here, but that are numeric types. So for example, here we have a shipping price, which is $4.99, and discount, and then we have a quantity, which is an integer. Now here, when price is multiplied by quantity, price is implicitly converted. Quantity is implicitly converted into a double, just like price. So the result of this will be a double. So something to watch out for is if you're doing division and you're dividing an integer by an integer, the result will be an integer, meaning you'll lose out on the decimal part of the answer if there was one. So usually with division, you'll often want to work with doubles. It depends on what you're doing. Sometimes doubles are more appropriate. Sometimes integers. It's case by case. It really depends on what you need to do. All right. You can also use the plus symbol that we used for addition here. You can use it in a different way, which is with strings. What it does, it actually appends these together. So here I take the value of first name from this variable, Peter, and I concatenate it to a string that contains a space, after which we have the last name. So the result will be Peter space Parker for the full name. All right, so that's the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.